All right, so I wanted to start off with the TEL survey growth from last year. Reason I like to point this out is we know that developing, a climate and culture where teachers feel, comfortable and feel like they have a strong environment in order to work in where they can grow as learners is essential to being able to target you know academic data. And when we look at some of the 2018 responses versus 2019, we see some growth in some significant areas from the previous year. um, SEL was a huge support that we put in this previous year within the school. One of the main things with gathering information about where the school was before taking over Kenton, it was important to know um, that Kenton was a consultant-driven school where we had consultants running the SEL supports, we had consultants running the intervention, and we had consultants running our basic literacy program. And one of the things that you'll also see highlighted within my DSS and the DSS that I asked for last year is, as a principal, I really believe that developing your ILT and the power within the school in order to shape some of the practices is really a high leverage move in order to move any school. We know that sometimes with consultant run programs, we end up with praise for compliance rather than for actually having improved student outcomes. And so that was reflected in this survey. When we look at SEL going from 46 to 84, we got rid of the Leader in Me program and built it in-house. Teachers were asking for morning meeting time, and so we have all teachers running a morning meeting where they build really strong classroom communities by bringing students together in some restorative practices. And so you see that increase on SEL from 46 to 84. With autonomy in the classroom, even though we're more focused on specific 90-day plan goals that we set out for, within those structures, teachers felt very empowered, and really using Cotter's change model allowed teachers to really feel a part of that process. So even though there were some changes and some things that we definitely now have that are essential components of our block, we moved from teachers feeling 50% feeling they have some autonomy on what instruction looks like to 90%. We look at expertise valued. This is one where at 33%, you can see where a consultant-driven culture where they're being told exactly what to do and how to do it without getting student results really devalued the expertise. That moved up to 84%. And one of the biggest ones that was important for me, especially this past year, was looking at how many Kenton teachers felt like it was a good place to work. Before taking over Kenton, I heard stories, and you hear stories about one year, 24 teachers resigning within a given year. And you know that that's due to, there's going to be some natural attrition, but then we're going to have teachers that just want to find a better place to work. And that 62% reflects that. This is too tough of a job to not enjoy coming to work and enjoying the people that you get to work with. And so we did a lot of things with our culture. Was able to hire a leadership team. I believe that message that Andre, you delivered yesterday around you can't do it alone. And that's one of the things where having an amazing opportunity as a first year principal to bring in an assistant principal, a new teaching partner, and new deans all in a single year led to a response of 97% of respondents feeling like it's a good place to work. Our staff retention, we only had 11% turnover. Katrina came and visited me earlier in this year and says, Drew, do you know, do you have the news? Like, you need to look at what your staff were able to, let's look at that staff turnover. And it was a celebration because over the previous years, it was a significant decrease in the number of staff that were turned over at the school. So I feel like that's an important result to get to where we look at some of the academic achievements that we had last year. When we look at CMAS achievement data, we set out with an 8% goal within ELA and math for our 90-day plan. If you take a look at ELA, we hit that 8% mark. We had 8.4% proficiency increase. ELA growth in fourth grade, we had 47% growth scores. In fifth grade, we had 61% growth scores. This fifth grade that I have here right now is 4 of the strongest teachers that I've ever worked with. And it's pretty amazing the things that, that we continue with a group of teachers who are just consummate learners, how I see those growth scores are going to be able to be replicated year after year. We're already seeing our students come in at a significantly higher rate on the reading response, which is a main focus from last year. And so we're excited to know, because in the next data that I'm going to show in a little bit is how we're able to reduce zeros. But when we're reducing zeros and increasing proficiency, the more kids that we start to put on that scoring map, those are the kids that we are really saw moving in that proficiency category. With the growth not being above 60% in both fourth and fifth grade, there's a couple key growth areas that we're targeting with some DSS strategies that are already in place, which I'll talk about in a little bit. If you look at math, having to focus on culture and climate and dig into ELA, we actually didn't have a lot of time to focus on math in the previous year, but we know that when we increase students' ability to read at a higher rate and really dissect that reading, you're also going to see a math improvement. I think that's where our math improvement came from with the proficiency increase, was really developing our readers. And we'll talk about our math goals that we have coming up for this year. Math growth, fourth grade was 32, and fifth grade was 60th percentile. So as you see right there, there are some fourth grade concerns. Those are our 2 grades that are most responsible for growth. We know that fourth grade assessment is a jump from the third grade assessment, and there's it needs to be a big year for when we really start to dig into rigor at a higher level. Looking at those scores, there were 2 teachers that I had moved out of the fourth grade. One I moved to a different grade level, and one is no longer with us here at Kenton. And both of their growth scores were contributed to that overall lower growth scores within fourth grade. And so within some new team members on this fourth grade and some of the work that they've been taking on, we really feel that we're going to be able to hit that 50% growth mark within fourth grade this year as well, which will definitely bump our SPF in addition to the proficiency increases that we're shooting for. So one of our main goals last year was the reduction of zeros on CMAS. It was great having this information ahead of time before the start of the year. We tailored our initial PD for the school year all towards reading response. Following Cotter's change model and knowing that we had to create a sense of urgency. This is something that I've been toiling with, is how do we create a sense of urgency that also doesn't stress out teachers in the sense that it will drop culture. And so really wanted to look for some innovative ways to get teachers on board with this goal. And so we know that sometimes just putting the data out there isn't, it doesn't always have that movement. And so one activity we did was we, shot baskets at the beginning of the year. Our teachers made 2 out of 150 baskets. And we talked about in 70 days, they're going to have to shoot baskets again. What's your plan in order to shoot more free throws and make more free throws over the next 70 days? And teachers kind of created these fun plans, but within those plans, they really talked about the repetitions and how much shooting they're going to practice. It was at that time that we showed that 58% of our students scored 0 on reading response on CMAS, which we know accounts for 40% of their overall CMAS. So I had 60% of kids that can't even begin to scratch the surface of proficiency because they are not even scoring. And so this was essential for us to target. And so On those plans, when they wrote they're going to be shooting every day, I presented this data to our teachers, but on the same lines of, you now have 70 days. What kind of activities would you want your students to be able to go through in order to demonstrate a greater level of proficiency? Very similar to where our scores were with proficiency on shooting the baskets. And so the big thing was repetition. We need to increase the amount of repetition that our students are going to have in order to even have a chance to move beyond these zeros on the CMAS reading responses, especially knowing the rigor of the questions and the complex text. So we devoted a significant amount of time to digging into complex text professional development. And I'm going to present these scores real quick. So if you look right here, Kenton, where are we at? Kenton Elementary had a reduction of basically 19%. So we went from 57.81% scoring zeros to 38.84%. And when we think about our students who scored proficient, we increased proficiency by 8%. And we had so many students scoring far below. Now that we have kids scoring on the page, those kids are gonna even grow more if we continue to focus on that. And so we do have a focus, which I'll share in just a moment, with our 90-day plan, with continuing to tackle even this 38.84%. One of the things that's amazing about our teachers is even as we have these growth scores, oftentimes people would come in, and we had some visitors throughout the year that would look at our writing and they would say, oh my gosh, you have to celebrate this. You have to stop and celebrate with your staff. And we kind of talked about how it's become such a natural process within the DDI framework for our teachers that they stop and they celebrate growth for, a quick small win. And then it's right back to what are the next steps that we need to do to get our students better. It's pretty amazing to watch their focus on that. So I wanted to give one kind of example. This is a 5th grade student. This was a student who was actually an GATE student at our school. The student, and this is actually the first interim last year. And so this is after, a couple months of instruction. And you can see the elements of our school-wide focus on ACE, answer, cite evidence, explain. And so it starts off in Swiss Family Robinson. The theme is to care for family. There's the answer. I know this because. There's the cited evidence. And then this shows the explanation. So the student taking on a very basic sense of what it means to be an ACE writer, and they took that on even going into interim 1. And so that's where we had to start. It was the basic framework for how do we get students on the page to where they start to answer a question, cite some evidence, and explain that evidence. But we know that within 5th grade, that's not the type of response that we want. So even though this was a growth for this student, we continued to, talk about we need to get more in depth. We need to develop the elaboration on these answers. And so here you see the same student's answer on interim number 3. So not only do you see just more text, I mean, the opportunity, the fact that our students were able to type this amount of text in that time, we also had to focus on how much time kids are getting on the computers and actually doing authentic work with their text. You also see over and over multiple examples to where citing evidence, they just go in depth into the cited evidence and the explanations following that evidence after it's cited. And so tremendous to see so many examples like this. We actually have put up many examples in our conference room where teachers can go in and really see. We put pictures next to the pieces just to really show what can be possible. And I know one thing that was powerful was we presented some data similar to this when we had RICO visit last year. And the big thing we talked about is with our mobility rate and with the fact that we might only have a student with us here at Kenton for 3 months, we can see some tremendous growth in the writing within only 3 months of working with that student. And so it also has this equity component to, it doesn't matter where you come in with with our staff, we're going to be prepared for this complex text block to really accelerate the learning for those students. So on our SPF, we didn't have, oops, let me go back. On the SPF, previous year we were 42.3 points, which was improvement by, I believe, 0.3 points. Otherwise, it would have been a priority improvement. We moved up to 44.6 points. One of the areas where we missed out on getting some points was with the special education cohort. We had 17 special education students take the test, and they had an average of 25, a 25% growth percentile. And so that number is definitely concerning in an area that we needed to target. Those are students who remained in the 0 column on their written responses. And so one of our focuses is how do we begin to support our special education students so that the growth of all students is being elevated, especially when we know that they're getting pulled out for instruction, and really wanting to support the level of that instruction and their access to the content that they're getting in the classroom. So we'll talk about that in a little bit when I talk about a support structure that we're a part of moving forward. But 90-day plan for this year or this first semester. We're going to be focusing on small group reading instruction. What we saw was with our students that are taking on reading response, all of our students demonstrated reading response, but the other aspect of that is your ability to take on the reading of the text, especially when the supports are pulled away and you have to make meaning from that text on your own. And so we know that our students are stronger writers and they understand the structure and format. If we also develop their reading along with that, we're going to be able to really see some tremendous growth. And so we've just finished a series of 5 PDs on small group reading, which have had some immediate impacts on instruction in the classroom. And we're going to be digging into the DOK structure, the independent practice that also goes along with small group reading, because we know that if small group reading is a high leverage activity, what about the activities of the other 15 or 75% of the class is doing when they're in independent practice? And so that's part of our work. And then another part of the literacy goal is data teams in the reading response through the RACE, or we actually just use the ACE, but looking at ACE. And when we look at that goal, one thing that's great about that is the data lives for longer than a day. Within math data, if you're not meeting immediately after that math data, it's hard a week later to talk about the next step because you're already four or five lessons into the next unit before you get to talk about it. So it's great that we can always respond. Our teams every week bring student work to the table that we analyze through a DDI process. And the DDI process has been demonstrating, teams really digging into what are the strengths, what are the next steps, what are the instructional strategies, and then we always end with what piece are we committed to bringing to the next week so that we can begin to dig into, so that we can see the progress. And so that's a key part of our 90-day plan is continuing with that reading response. Within math, knowing that this is an area that we do want to hone in on, we have selected math as our data days for this year. One thing that we've noticed with Bridges is each lesson has a significant amount of time that is dedicated to teaching that lesson. Some lessons, especially when you're considering students that have an entry point where they maybe don't have the prerequisite skills to dig into that learning, and when you accommodate for that, a single Bridges lesson taught as is in the book could go, 2.5 hours. I mean, they're pretty intense to get students to some of those high key leverage moves. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is how do we really look at this resource and use it because it is standard aligned but use it in a way that is meaningful for our students and moving them towards a greater level of proficiency. We're operating on this 10% of our kids being proficient, and we want to be able to change that, but we don't want to have to wait even 6 weeks or 4 weeks within a unit assessment to determine that they don't got it. We want to know that immediately. The challenge with that is when you have a long lesson, oftentimes teachers don't get to those key questions that are going to be outlined in the unit because the lesson takes a while. And when that's the case, a teacher is going to be more likely to cut out some of the parts that get a little bit more difficult and do more of the front end stuff. And then we don't get to that exit ticket that defines the level of rigor that students need to know at the end of that lesson. There are certain lessons within Bridges where this is the only time your students are going to learn about this key skill that is going to be assessed either on the unit test or the interim test. And if we don't even give them the exposure to do 3 independent practices on that day and then have an exit ticket, there's no way that our kids are going to have it when they go down to take that test, to simply transfer that application. In talking with Joseph, who had 9% growth on CMAS over at Tollgate, this is one of the strategies that they used. They present the problem up front, but they say, let's have our kids wrestle with these problems that are from the unit assessment or interim assessment early on in the lesson, and so that we know that they're getting exposure to it, and then we're going to scaffold within that. And so it's something that, we have a data set from another school that we know has seen some effective work. So that makes us more confident in choosing this as a goal. And so one of our keys is to really take the assessments, whether it's interim or unit assessment, attach an assessment item to a lesson, and actually start off the lesson by saying to our students, one second, by the end of this lesson, you will be able to do a problem like this. And this is the problem you're going to solve. And so then all the scaffolding is built toward that problem. And so this is one of the big things. We're going to dig into this on the half day, part of the half day on the 21st. Unless they choose one of the other 90-day plan goals, I won't go all into that. But it is one of our goals for this year, is to align this work to really target the math formative assessment. MTSS, it's in the 90-day plan. I know it's not, a big part of the presentation, but we continue with our road. It's gained a lot of steam here at the school. We're really talking about the road to success starts at Kenton. It's something that is ingrained in all of our students. So we're seeing a higher culture around that. Our morning meetings, some really proactive supports and mind up. And a strong attendance team that's going out to houses and really working to get better attendance here at the school. So this is something that I wanted to highlight in case you're kind of wondering why we may not ask for certain things. There are certain things that we have within the school that we're really excited about. I'd say the first one is we are part of that DSS structure where we are going to get a full-time coach here at Kenton to support ESS. And so that's really going to help us tackle that 25% growth score, which I think is an amazing support. And I really appreciate the district looking at that support differently, knowing that sometimes we spread it so thin that no one really gets any help. Let's keep it tight, do a few schools and do it well. I know that's sometimes tough for schools because they could feel left out, but in the end, we know that it's going to be best for students. So really appreciate that, that we're one of those schools. Had a great meeting with our coach and, kind of outlined some direction that we want to go, which is important too, because one thing we find with special ed sometimes is it can be a tough group to evaluate. The reason is they have, they have ESS directors and consultants that come in and work with them. And so sometimes they can hear different messages. And there's been a lot of messages within the district with some of that turnover is what's mandatory, what's not mandatory, what curriculum can we use, how do we balance? And because of that shift, we kind of need to get centered and have kind of we're going to look at it as kind of a critical triangle between myself, the coach and teachers, and the director, where we're going to do some of this work together so we can really start to shape that work and what we want to communicate, what it looks like here at Kenton. Mental health supports. One of the things that I did with Andre a few years ago was look at what do we have for behavior, what do we have for instruction. Has to be some balance there. Right now, before coming into Kenton, one of the comments I heard was I had to stand at the end of the door and make sure kids didn't run away every day. And that was, someone in a higher position that then wasn't allowed to be a part of, the instruction or the coaching. And so I had to shift so that we have 2 deans here at the school. I have a restorative paraprofessional. The mill levy has been, amazing to the amount of supports that we've had come in. I now have a full-time counselor, in addition to a social worker who's, kind of social worker / psychologist. It was a psychologist last year, but we received a social worker, which is great. And then we have a 0.5 Aurora mental health. So looking at that, it was kind of similar to an email that I know Ron Schumacher sent out that says, this is really the first year that we feel, like where we can say we have a strong amount of mental health supports, and pretty amazing to be able to speak to all those supports. We also have Playworks at our school. We happen to get, I know it's a little bit of luck of the draw with who you get at your school, but our person is absolutely amazing with the kids and with organizing recess. And so we're seeing less incidents at recess, which is great with that support. I do have the best custodian in the district. This person is phenomenal. She responds to things so fast that it is just night and day difference than what I've ever had before with custodial. And amazing cafeteria staff who really come out and sing happy birthday to kids. And so really just throughout the building, the support staffs have been incredible. So appreciate all the work that goes behind the scenes for all the people that I don't get to hire too, that I'd like to say thank you for the great people that they put in my building. So differentiated, that brings us to the differentiated support requests. I had a great conversation with Garrett this past week, and we were talking about, if we could design anything for the 31st, what would it be that we'd like to put in a request for? And one of the challenges that I shared was sometimes I don't necessarily like to choose the goals that I'm working on for my 90-day plan, because I don't know that the message is going to be the message that we're building from within. And so sometimes if I said, like, let's do small group reading, I'd like them to go to a small group reading PD. They might get a PD that's not aligned to what we're doing here. And so that can sometimes cause, it can actually take culture down a little bit, and it can make you take a couple steps back. So I was suggesting PDs that would be good for my staff, but not necessarily connected to our 90-day plan goals. And so that got me to thinking about, would there be a possibility for a differentiated support request for that day, where Kenton would design 2 classes for K-5 teachers. One of our classes would be math professional learning and planning on formative assessments in bridges. Now, we'd also want to, there might be some other schools that want to share in this work, and so we wouldn't need to make these exclusive to Kenton, but I would love if they could be offered here, and if other schools wanted to participate, we could, obviously determine how many slots we have open just based on, the size that we can accommodate, but we'd be happy to include others that would like to select this as a professional learning opportunity. The second would be language objective implementation with corresponding frames during ELD. And that was one that we thought was important. Now that I'm looking at it, we actually determined that it was important enough that we are doing this on the 21st. So I should have looked at that a little bit, because we're going to do that in the afternoon of the 21st when we have our in-house PD. But I think overall it would be to be able to design 2 classes that really focus on supports that our teachers need to be able to carry out 90-day plan. But again, being willing to open those up to any other schools that would like to participate. I actually have a few schools coming out. Vanessa Valencia is bringing out 2 5th grade teachers to watch my 5th grade complex text block, and then watch the 5th grade data team immediately after that on the 29th. I also have Lynn Knoll, Sean Graziani is going to be coming out to observe it, and then Heather from Montview is going to be coming out to watch that on another day as well. And so we're definitely willing to share learning with others. The other one would be more time allotted for planning immediately after lunch on the district data day. The morning of the math was great to dig into the data, and it went really well. My teachers were just excited, great learners during the process. After lunch, when it got to be a little bit later and some plan time opened up, you lose a little bit of steam in the day. So the more that we could move some of that planning where they can dig into those, some of the learning around the bridges and the formative assessments to a little bit closer to after lunch would be a great support. The other thing that I was looking at was I did an RMC audit at Laredo in my last year that I was there, so about 2 years ago. The process was pretty smooth and it went pretty well, but I just feel like postponing the RMC audit until next school year would be a support, just knowing that the focus that we want to be able to bring in the second semester and some of the work that goes into the RMC audit, and really having a good feel with some of the direction that we're moving right now and where our climate and culture is at, that we could postpone that for an additional year before we dig in there. And so, yes, that's the presentation that I have. Last year for DSS, we just asked for autonomy to be able to get rid of the consultants and do our work. And we were really excited with the results and what we were able to build. And so really some of the DSS strategies are just about being able to continue to really dig into that work and see the fruits of that labor here at the building. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Drew. We're gonna get together and have a conversation around what we heard. And in your case, we heard a lot. Just throwing that out there. So, it may take us longer to get back with you, Drew, than everybody else, but anyway.
I thought I followed the script, wasn't that right?
We'll get back with you, Drew, so just hang in there, all right? No, we'll get together and we'll have some conversations.
You should have put a word count on it.
Yeah. Whoever is specifically assigned to help support your request, we'll connect directly with you. Thanks again.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
Work out there. All right.
Yes. All right. Bye.